the ash still falls some mornings. Not like it did in the beginning, not in those thick, choking curtains that turned noon into midnight and coated everything in a gray that had no name before the war. Now it comes down soft and occasional, the way snow used to, though I only barely remember snow. I was 13 when the bombs dropped. I am 35 now. That's 22 years of learning how to be alive in a world that wasn't built for living anymore. My name is Eli. I don't use a last name. Last names belong to a world that kept records. I want to tell you what it's been like. Not the dramatic parts, though there are plenty of those, but the real parts. The parts that happen between the dramatic moments, in the long silences, in the dark hours when sleep won't come, and you lie there listening to the wind move through the wreckage of what used to be a suburb. I want to tell you because I think it matters that someone does. I think it matters that the shape of a human life, even one like mine, gets put into words somewhere, even if those words are only spoken into the dark. So let me start at the beginning. Or not quite the beginning, let me start at the moment I think of as the hinge. The moment everything bent and never came back straight. It was September 14th, 2029. I know the date because my mother had written it at the top of the page in my school planner. She always did that, wrote the date in my planner because she said I'd forget otherwise, and she was right, I would have. I was sitting in 7th grade English class in a town called Millbrook in central Ohio. We were reading The Outsiders. I remember that specifically. I remember Mrs. Calloway had just read the line, "Stay gold, Ponyboy," out loud, and I had thought it was corny. The kind of line that adults got weepy about for reasons that made no sense to 13-year-olds. Then the lights went out. Not just in the classroom. Everywhere. All at once, like someone had pulled a single enormous plug from the wall of the world. The smartboard went black. The humming of the ventilation system stopped. Every small electronic sound that we had all been so thoroughly accustomed to that we never heard it anymore, it all vanished in an instant, and the silence it left behind was so sudden and so complete that several kids actually gasped. Mrs. Calloway said, "It's okay, it's just a power outage." And her voice was perfectly calm because she had no way of knowing that there would never be reliable power again. Not like that, not ever. The principal came on the intercom, battery-powered, as it turned out, and told us to remain calm and stay in our classrooms. And then, maybe 40 minutes later, the sound reached us. I've tried to describe that sound to people who weren't there, and I've never managed it adequately. It wasn't an explosion in the way movies had taught me to expect. It wasn't a bang. It was more like the world itself made a sound it had never made before, a low, sustained, enormous pressure, like reality cracking along a seam. It rolled through the floor and up through the chair legs and into my body before it ever reached my ears. I felt it in my chest. Several kids started crying immediately, that animal kind of crying, before they even knew why. We didn't know what it was yet. Some of the kids thought it was an earthquake. Mrs. Calloway kept saying it was okay, it was okay. She was a good woman. I hope it was fast for her. She was dead within 6 months, like so many of the adults who hadn't been in good health to begin with. They let us out of school early. I walked home 3 blocks, a walk I'd made hundreds of times, and everything looked normal, which was the strangest thing. The sky was still blue. The maple trees in the Hendersons' front yard were just starting to turn orange at the edges. A dog was barking somewhere. And yet there were no cars moving, and every house was silent, and people were standing on their porches looking east with expressions I had never seen on adult faces before. My mother was standing on our porch too. She grabbed me when she saw me coming up the street, grabbed me and held me in a way she hadn't held me since I was very small, and over her shoulder I could see my father in the doorway with his phone pressed to his ear, his face doing something complicated that I didn't have a word for. He caught my eye and shook his head, just once, and then looked back at the phone. That night, before the cell networks finally gave out entirely, we learned what had happened. The war had been building for years. I know that now, I understand it now in ways that a 13-year-old couldn't. The aquifer collapses in the American West, the Ganges Basin crisis, the successive failures of the monsoon over South Asia, the Arctic resource land grabs that turned into actual military confrontations. Water, food, lithium, rare earths, the things the modern world had been built on and was running out of. The historians, the ones who survived, who scratched their accounts into whatever paper they could find, they called it the Resource War, though it had a dozen different names depending on where you were standing when it started. What I know is this: 7 major metropolitan areas were struck in the first exchange. Cincinnati was one of them. We were close enough to feel it, far enough to survive the immediate blast. What we couldn't survive, what nobody could really survive, was everything that came after. I won't dwell too long on the first winter, because it is the part of this story that I find hardest to speak about, and because it is the part that has been spoken about enough. The cold, the hunger, the way communities that had been neighbors for decades suddenly became something else when the food ran out. The things people did. My father died in February of 2030, 5 months after the bombs. Not from violence. From his heart, which had always been a little unreliable and which could not withstand the cold and the stress and the radical reduction in everything: food, warmth, medicine, hope. He went asleep one night and didn't wake up, and that was mercy of a kind, I've come to believe. He was spared the years that followed. My mother lasted until I was 17. She was a resourceful woman, more resourceful than anyone had known, including herself, because you don't know what you're made of until the circumstances demand the answer. She learned to preserve food, to filter water, to treat wounds with what was available. She formed alliances with neighbors. She bartered and negotiated and organized. She kept us alive for 4 years through the force of a will I still find astonishing when I think about it. She died of an infection from a cut on her leg that, in the old world, would have been dealt with by a tube of antibiotic ointment and a bandage. In the new world, it killed her in 11 days. I was alone after that, technically. 17 years old in a collapsing suburb of a dead city, alone. But by then I had learned enough to not be completely helpless, and I had already begun to find the people who would become my true family. The cobbled together, mismatched, arguing, laughing, grieving community of survivors that I've been part of ever since. Let me tell you about where I live now, because it is everything. We call it the depot, because it used to be a railroad depot, a mid-sized freight facility on the edge of what was once a small city called Harwick. Population 40,000 before the war. Population now somewhere between 800 and 1,000 depending on how you count the outliers who live in the surrounding farmland and come in for trade. The depot itself holds maybe 200 people year-round. It is the closest thing to a town center that our community has. The main building is vast and drafty and beautiful in a way that ruins often are: all that honest brick and steel, those high windows, the sense of a structure that was built to last and has therefore lasted. We've sectioned it off with salvaged materials: old drywall, timber, corrugated metal, canvas. In winter it becomes a single collective organism of shared warmth, everyone pressing together by instinct. In summer we spread out, take back porches and open the great loading dock doors to let in the air. Around the main building we've added to it over the years. Gardens, mostly raised beds now, because the soil in a lot of places is still unreliable, still carrying things we don't entirely understand. A smithy, where a man named Garrett, who learned metalwork from books scavenged from library ruins, makes tools and hardware and occasionally weapons when he must. A clinic, which is a generous word for 2 rooms, and a woman named Dr. Su-Yeon, who was a second-year medical student when the bombs fell, and has had 22 years of extremely practical education since then. There is a school. That's the thing that still gets me, when I let myself think about it. There is a school. 23 children between the ages of 4 and 14, sitting in a repurposed waiting room, learning to read and do mathematics and understand the world they've been born into. Teaching them is a rotating responsibility. Everyone contributes what they know. I teach what might loosely be called history. which is a complicated thing when the history you're teaching is something that happened to you personally. I want to tell you about a specific day, because specific days are what a life is actually made of. 3 months ago, it was late winter, the hardest stretch. I went out on a scavenge run with two others. A woman named Petra, who is 31 and has been with our community for 8 years, and a young man named Tamaz, who is 19 and was born 2 years after the bombs fell, making him one of the first generation who has no memory of the before world whatsoever. Tamaz is fascinating to me in the way that I imagine a child is fascinating to a parent, this creature that is entirely itself, uncontaminated by the world you came from. He has no grief for what was lost because he never knew what was there to lose. He grew up in the after and it is simply the world to him. He is practical and unsentimental in ways that sometimes catch me off guard. He is also curious in ways that the rest of us sometimes aren't, because we've spent so much of our energy on survival that curiosity began to feel like a luxury. That day we were moving through what had been the commercial district of a town about 12 miles from the depot. Most of it has already been picked over. We're down to secondary and tertiary scavenging now, looking in places that earlier teams dismissed. We were working through a collapsed sporting goods store, which sounds unpromising but which had yielded useful things before. Rope, certain types of fabric, the occasional sealed container of something still usable. Petra found a rack of hunting knives still in their sheaths in a back storage room. The steel was good, some surface rust, but nothing that couldn't be worked out. That alone would have made the trip worth it. Tamaz found something else. He came out of a collapsed section of the ceiling carrying a box of trading cards. Sports cards, baseball, probably from the early 2020s. They were perfectly preserved in their sealed packs, which protected them from moisture. He held them out to me with a look of genuine bafflement on his face. "What are these?" he asked. And I stood there holding a sealed pack of baseball cards in a ruined sporting goods store on a gray winter day 22 years after the end of the world. And I had to explain to a 19-year-old what baseball was. What sports were, the organized kind, the professional kind, the kind where millions of people would spend money to watch other people play games. The concept of a stadium, the concept of a crowd, the concept of a hot dog, which led to the concept of a food vendor, which led to the concept of disposable income, which led to a conversation that took us the entire 12-mile walk back to the depot and still wasn't finished when we arrived. Tamaz was not disturbed by any of this. He listened the way he always does, with his head slightly tilted, filing everything away. At the end he said, "It sounds like it was fun, the stadium part." And I said, "Yes, it was, I think it was," and he nodded as if this were useful data and walked away. I stood there for a while after. I do that sometimes at the end of a conversation about the before world. Stand still for a moment in the aftermath of it, like you do after a song ends. There are things I miss that I don't expect to miss. Not the big things, not electricity or the internet or the ability to get in a car and drive anywhere. Those absences are so large that they've become part of the landscape, as unremarkable now as the horizon. You stop missing the horizon when you've made your peace with where you are. I miss small things, specific things. I miss the smell of a laundromat, that combination of warm lint and industrial detergent, the sound of machines turning, the weird communal intimacy of doing laundry next to strangers. I miss being bored in the particular way that required infinite entertainment to cure. I miss the sound of a refrigerator hum, which is the sound of a house being alive without anyone making it so. I miss the specific pleasure of a gas station on a road trip, the way you'd step out of the car into different air than the air you'd started in, the coffee in a paper cup that was never quite right but was part of the ritual. I miss my mother's handwriting. She had very specific handwriting, small and precise, every letter fully formed, the kind of handwriting that people used to call old-fashioned. I have one piece of paper she wrote on that I still have, a grocery list from 2029, found in the pocket of a jacket I kept. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, the pasta with the ridges that Dad likes. It is the most valuable object I own, not for any practical reason. Because it is her hand, reaching across 22 years, reminding me that she was real. We've built something here. I want to be honest about what that means and what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean we've rebuilt civilization or anything close to it. It doesn't mean we've solved the hard problems, the soil remediation, the long-term agricultural sustainability, the medical knowledge gaps that still kill people who shouldn't die. It doesn't mean we've solved the human problems either. We have conflicts. We have people who take more than their share. We have disagreements about how decisions get made that sometimes threaten to fracture what we've built. We have grief, enormous quantities of grief, and not everyone manages it well. And there are people in this community who have simply been too damaged by what they lived through to function the way a community needs its members to function. We hold them anyway. That's a choice we've made and keep making. What we have built is the habit of choosing to stay. That sounds small. It is enormous. Every winter there are people who leave, usually young people, usually men who have heard rumors of something better somewhere else, a community that's cracked some problem we haven't, a city that's getting power back, a valley where the soil is clean and the weather is mild and there is food enough for everyone. Some of these rumors are partly true. Most of them are entirely invented. The people who leave mostly don't come back, and we don't know what happens to them, and not knowing is its own kind of grief. But most people stay. Every spring, after the worst of winter has passed, I look around at who's still here, and every year it moves me in a way I can't entirely articulate. This collection of battered, stubborn, complicated human beings who have decided that this place, this specific dirt and these specific walls and these specific faces, are worth the fighting for. That is what civilization actually is, I've come to believe. Not the infrastructure, not the technology, the daily decision to stay and try. I should tell you about love, because it would be dishonest not to. I have loved people in this new world. I have loved them fully and imperfectly, and with the particular intensity that comes from knowing that nothing is guaranteed, that the person sleeping next to you could be gone by spring and you have to love them now, right now, with everything you have and nothing held in reserve. I was with a woman named Claire for 6 years. She was 29 when we met, a few years older than me, and she had survived things I will not detail because they are her story to tell, not mine. We found each other the way people do in small communities, gradually and then all at once, the slow accumulation of shared meals and shared watches and shared jokes, and then one night something shifted and we looked at each other and both knew. Claire died 4 years ago, a complication during childbirth that Dr. Suyon could not resolve with the tools available to her. The baby, a boy, died with her. I am telling you this not to make you sad for me, or not only for that, but because I think it is important to say clearly that grief in this world is not like grief used to be. In the before world, grief was something that happened occasionally, that interrupted the ordinary flow of a life, and then, if you were lucky and had enough support and time, gradually receded so that the life could resume. Here, grief is structural. It is load-bearing. Everyone is carrying it all the time. The floor is made of it. You don't overcome grief. You integrate it. You keep walking with it in your chest, and eventually the walking itself becomes a form of tribute to what you're carrying, and something that might be called living assembles itself around that. I am not over Claire. I will not be over Claire. And that is not a wound. That is the appropriate response to having loved someone who was worth loving. There are nights when I climb up to the roof of the depot's main building and look out at the dark. I want you to understand what dark actually means now, what it looks like, the dark of a world without electric light over most of its surface. On a clear night it is breathtaking, which is a word I don't use carelessly. The stars. I had seen the stars before, of course, but not like this. Not this many, not this bright, not with this sense of depth that makes the sky look like something you could fall into. The Milky Way is a physical presence on a clear night, a river of faint light overhead, and I have had conversations with Tamaz and the other young people about what it means that, for most of human history, everyone who lived could see that sky every night. And then, for about 100 years, they couldn't, and now they can again. Sometimes I try to put myself in the place of someone from the before world looking at this moment in history. The losses are obvious. They would be horrified. They would be devastated, and they should be, because what was lost was enormous and much of it needed not to have been lost. But they might also see things we can't see clearly from inside. The communities that have reformed around genuine mutual dependence rather than economic transaction. The way food means something different now, every meal a small miracle of collective effort. The way medicine is practiced with a humility and a creativity and a genuine commitment to the person in front of you that the old systems didn't always allow. The way children learn things that matter instead of things that were constructed to seem like they matter. I'm not romanticizing this. I'm not saying the apocalypse was good. It was catastrophic. It continues to be catastrophic. People die of things they should not die of. Children are malnourished in ways that will affect them forever. Entire branches of human knowledge have been lost and may never be recovered. The violence that still occurs between communities, the raids and the conflicts over territory and resources, these are not things I can stand at a distance and philosophize about. They are close and real, and have taken people I loved. What I am saying is that a human life can be lived here, a real one, and I didn't always know that. When I was about 20, I went through a period of several months where I was genuinely not sure I wanted to continue. This is not an unusual thing for someone to go through in the circumstances I was in. It is, in fact, almost statistically inevitable. And I say it plainly not because I want to be dramatic, but because I think the honest account of surviving requires honesty about the moments when you weren't sure you were going to. I had lost my mother 3 years before. I had survived 2 winters that should have killed me. I was living in a loose collection of survivors that hadn't yet become the community the depot would eventually become, and the social bonds were thin, and the situation was precarious, and I was 20 years old and completely alone in any meaningful sense, and I could not see forward. The future looked like nothing, a blank, a void, not darkness because darkness implies the potential for light. What pulled me through was something small and frankly embarrassing, and I'm going to tell you what it was. Seeds. I had found in an abandoned garden center on the edge of a suburb we were passing through a sealed packet of heirloom tomato seeds. Brandywine tomatoes. I recognized the name because my mother had grown them, because she had said once that they were the best tomatoes she'd ever tasted, dense and sweet, and slightly ugly-looking the way really good tomatoes often are. The packet was still sealed, still potentially viable. Tomatoes take about 80 days from transplant to fruit. I would have to keep myself alive for at least 80 days to find out. I kept myself alive for 80 days. The tomatoes grew. They were not beautiful exactly. The soil was imperfect. The conditions were not ideal, but they grew. And in late summer I picked one and ate it, and it tasted, improbably, impossibly, the way I remembered tomatoes from the before world tasting. Sweet and slightly acidic and full of something that I can only call summer, that irreducible taste of warmth and growth. I cried. I'm not ashamed to say that. I cried for a long time, sitting in a ruined garden in the ruins of a town in the ruins of a world, eating a tomato and crying. And when I was done, I planted the seeds from that tomato in a container I could carry, and I carried them with me. And the next year I planted them again, and the year after that, and for 15 years I have been growing Brandywine tomatoes wherever I land, and distributing the seeds to anyone who wants them. I have no children. Claire and I's son didn't live to be named. But those tomatoes are growing in 40 or 50 small gardens that I know of across the region, and probably in others I've lost track of, and I find something in that, a continuity that has nothing to do with biology. A small thread running forward from me into a future I won't see. I want to talk about what we know and what we don't know. We don't know what the world looks like. Not really, not globally. We have fragments, travelers passing through, the occasional radio signal, still a few out there, though they flicker and fade, some printed documents that made it through the first years. We know that there are communities in Europe, in parts of Asia, in South America. We know that some places got hit worse than we did, and some places got hit less. We know that the winter after the bombs, the first 2 years, really killed an astonishing proportion of the people who survived the initial blasts. Disease, cold, starvation, violence. The Great Dying, as some people call it. We have no real number. We will probably never have a number. We don't know if anyone is rebuilding in a meaningful way, at scale. There are rumors of a city in the Pacific Northwest that has restored partial power, that has something like functional governance, that has opened communication channels with what remains of communities along the coast. Whether this is true, and what it means if it is, I can't say. What we know is what we can touch. This building, these fields, these people. And there is a kind of discipline in that, in the restriction to what is actually knowable, that I've come to value, though it took years to stop mourning the loss of the illusion of global awareness, of the sense that you knew what was happening everywhere at once. You never really knew. The before world just made you feel like you did. There is a ritual we have at the depot that I want to describe. On the 14th of September every year, the anniversary of the bombs, we gather. Everyone in the community who can get there, and often people from surrounding areas as well, travelers who know the date and what it means and want to mark it with others. We light fires, as many as we can, as large as we can safely manage, because fire is the one form of abundance we can still sometimes allow ourselves. And we talk. That's the ritual. We talk. Anyone who wants to speak can speak, and people speak about who they've lost, and what they remember, and what they're grateful for, and what they're afraid of, and what they hope. There are no rules about what can be said. There is no authority deciding what the correct way to feel about the day is. We just talk, for as long as people have things to say, which is usually until the fires burn low and the cold of the night reasserts itself. Last year I spoke about my mother's handwriting on that grocery list. I had never spoken about it before in public, and I didn't plan to. It came out of me unexpectedly, the way things sometimes do at those gatherings, because you are in a space where grief is the common language and your own grief suddenly feels speakable. I described the specific shape of her lowercase g, which had a loop that curved back on itself in a particular way I've never seen anyone else write. People listened. That's what we do. We listen to each other name our dead, because naming is the only resurrection available to us. A woman named Adiz, who is 63 years old and one of the oldest people in our community, and who was in her 40s when the bombs fell, told me afterward that my mother sounded like a remarkable person. I said she was. She said, "Then you carry something remarkable in you," and moved on before I could respond, which was probably the right amount of time to say that. I am 35 years old. I was not supposed to think of 35 as particularly young in the before world. It was a fully adult age. People had careers and mortgages and children by 35, had already made most of the choices that would define them. It was considered, if anything, a time for some reassessment. Am I where I thought I'd be? Is this what I wanted? The first distant sound of something calling itself middle age. Here it is different. The life expectancy in our community, worked out informally by Dr. Suyon based on 20 years of observation, is somewhere in the mid-50s for people who have made it to adulthood, which makes me not young, exactly, but solidly middle of the road. There are people my age who are grandparents, because their children were born young as a form of hope or necessity or both. There are people my age who are community leaders, who have children looking up at them the way I used to look at adults, expecting them to know things. I don't know things. I know some things. I know how to find potable water in difficult terrain. I know which wild plants in this region are edible and which will kill you. I know how to read weather patterns without instruments. I know how to set a fracture, more or less, after having had my own set and watching Dr. Suyon work enough times. I know what it means when a person's eyes go dull in a certain way, and what it means when they don't, and how to help them back from the former to the latter when it's possible, and how to let them go with dignity when it isn't. I know that you can build something worth living in out of almost nothing. I know this not philosophically but empirically. I have watched it happen, participated in building it, live inside it every day. I know that there is beauty in the afterworld that is not just survival's consolation prize. Real beauty. The beauty of the night sky I mentioned, yes, but also the way a community looks when it's working, when people are distributed through their tasks and everyone's hands are doing something, and there's a hum of collective purpose that is almost musical. The way food tastes when you've grown it and preserved it and cooked it yourself, when the entire chain from seed to meal is something you understand and participated in. The way a child who's never known another world still laughs exactly the same as children always laughed, the same pure, unself-conscious sound, unmodified by catastrophe, unchanged. The way human beings persist in being human beings, in the teeth of every reason not to. It is evening now as I finish telling you this. The light outside is that particular shade of faded gold that happens in early spring, when the days are getting longer but the warmth hasn't caught up yet. Someone is playing a guitar on the loading dock. We have maybe a dozen instruments in the community, all carefully maintained, each with its own story of how it survived. The song is something slow and I don't recognize it. Possibly it's original. We make original things here. We make music and we make stories and we make objects that are beautiful as well as functional, because that turn out to be a need too, the beauty, as fundamental as the food and the warmth. I think about the 13-year-old I was, sitting in that English class, finding it corny that a book would tell you to stay gold. I want to tell him some things. I want to tell him that the world is going to change in ways he cannot imagine and cannot prepare for, but that he is more capable than he knows, and that the people he is going to lose were worth loving and he should love them more openly than he does, should say it more, should not save anything back. I want to tell him that there are going to be seeds that save him. I want to tell him that the word corny comes from corn, which comes from the fact that something simple and unadorned and abundant was once considered so common as to be beneath sophistication, and that there is coming a time in his life when he will understand that simple and unadorned and abundant is exactly right, is the whole thing, is what it was always about. I want to tell him that the fires we light on September 14th are beautiful, that the names we speak into them are heard, that the dead do not entirely leave while someone is still here to say their name. I want to tell him to stay gold. I think I understand it now. The guitar on the loading dock has stopped, and the last of the evening light is going, and the stars are starting to come out, first one, then three, then dozens, then all of them at once. The way they do, and somewhere in the main building someone is starting a cook fire and I can smell the smoke, which smells like dinner, which smells like people being alive together, which is the smell of what we have managed to make here in the long years after everything ended. Everything ended. We did not.